Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the RIBA, and welcome to the 2017 Royal Gold Medal Student Crit. I'm Jane Duncan, and I am the President of the RIBA, and I have the honour and pleasure to chair today's event. Since it was first featured as part of the calendar of the RIBA's Royal Gold Medal, it was an annual celebration 11 years ago, the Crit has become an established and popular event, actually one of my great favourites, if you don't mind me saying so. It is a unique opportunity for all of us in this room to engage in a debate about views on architectural design and theory between two generations, if you like, of accomplished RIBA medal winners. Today, we'll hear from three talented graduates who 2 months ago I had the great pleasure to present with the 2016 RIBA President's Medals in the dissertation, bronze and silver categories. Each presentation will be appraised by our panel that has as guest of honour the eminent Brazilian architect Paulo Mendes de Rocha, who's sitting here with us. Tonight, Paulo is giving a lecture here at the RIBA that promises to take us on a journey through the historical rediscovery of Brazil, from colonial times to its contemporary identity as a nation with a vibrant, creative industry and ambitious architectural and urban planning proposals. And tomorrow night, I will have the honour to award Paulo with the most prestigious accolade in architecture, the Royal Gold Medal, at a dinner in the Florence Hall here at the RIBA. Also, in this year's Crit panel, I have, on my far right, Dr. Harriet Harris, Senior Tutor in Interior Design and Architecture at the Royal College of Art, who was also a member of the 2016 RIBA Dissertation Medal Judging Panel. We're also joined here by Professor David Gloucester, RIBA Director of Education, who chaired the two judging panels that selected the winners of the 2016 bronze and silver medals. I'm very grateful to both of you, Harriet and David, for the hard work that you've put in to selecting the winners, and I'm delighted that you're able to join us today. The structure of the Crit is as follows. Each medalist will have up to 15 minutes to present their project. That's quite quick. And each presentation will be followed by a critique session from the panel for 5 to 10 minutes. At the end, we'll allow the opportunity to ask questions directly from you to the President's medalists. What you may have picked up already is that there's a simultaneous translation happening at the moment between English and Portuguese. I'm very happy to say for Paulo. So he will be listening to your presentations and having a simultaneous translation. And then he will give his answer, and that will be translated for you straight away. Right, let's get started. We're going to start with Roy Kachadurian, a Part 2 graduate from the University of Liverpool, who won the 2016 Dissertation Medal with his work, A Juxtaposition of Ideological Expressions, evaluating the urban transformations of Yerevan, Armenia, during the 1915 to 2015. The stage is yours. Thanks, Roy.
What determines a sense of belonging to a territory? How can identity be maintained or created? Yerevan, the crown jewel and capital city of Armenia, has been grappling with these issues in a quest of rediscovering its national pride after years of political oppression, even genocide. My dissertation explored the role of architecture in this endeavour through Alexander Tamanyan's work, an overlooked master whose contribution forms today's city branding. My project last year discussed the contribution of Armenian-Russian architect Alexander Tamanyan and his substantial work in Yerevan during the 1920s. The research investigated his attempts to create a national architectural style and rejuvenate the country. Following the Soviet occupation in 1920, a recently formed independent state was forcefully ended. However, its nationalistic ambitions were not completely inactive throughout the foreign rule. Tamanyan's 1924 master plan for the city was deeply rooted within the nationalistic rhetoric. Over time, it was widely used as an emblem to the city, presumably due to its rich political allegories and nationalistic drive. Through it, efforts were made to overcome a difficult past by raising specific histories from the city and replacing them by the enhancement of other selected memories. After being forgotten for some years, Tamanyan's efforts were revived after Armenia broke free from the Soviet Union. This was made evident in large developments within central Yerevan, acting as the completion of Tamanyan's vision. The Armenian diaspora, particularly from Russia and USA, played an important role in these works, importing with them ideologies from abroad. Therefore, the dissertation discussed three phases within the recent urban transformation of Yerevan: the pre-Soviet, Soviet, and post-Soviet. So I will discuss these three phases and attempt to braid them together in a coherent narrative within the time constraints of this presentation. And before I do so, I will briefly describe the reasons that drew me to perform this research and the methods that were applied. So I have an Armenian heritage. I grew up in Cyprus, and for a lot of people won't know, but 2015 was the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. So my great-grandmother was a survivor of that at a young age, which being given the opportunity to do a dissertation about pretty much anything, I thought I would investigate the architecture of Yerevan, the capital city, understand the parameters that were used to sculpt the city, and sort of wider afield as well within the country. The topics of identity started jumping at me from a very early stage, and the project became an interesting way of finding out about a country and a city, but also more about my personal heritage. So a little bit about the methods that were used. Fairly unprecedented in some bits. I worked in a London-based architecture practice called Tim Flynn Architects, who also happened to have an office in Yerevan. This was something that I found out through my early research and contacted them, and they graciously accepted for me to work with them and put me in contact with the Yerevan office, where I was able to converse with many of my colleagues abroad about the city, but also be put in contact with other local architects, scholars, and people who are interested in the development of the city. This was a very important part from the very outset of understanding a city, not just from reading books about it, but actually being immersed in conversation with people who have a passion for learning more about that place. And also, I went to Yerevan, did a site visit, visited the buildings that I'll be talking about, and I had the opportunity to go to some of the museums and the archives locally, which again was an invaluable source for finding drawings and being able to analyze them, and bits of text which were unpublished, again, which are very helpful to braid a story together, which I will conclude to shortly. So Yerevan has a rich history. I attempt to sort of describe that here in this little diagram here, particularly for Yerevan, and about the buildings that I will be discussing about. As I mentioned earlier about the genocide, which was a sort of very important part of the city and its development at a later stage. It was under the Soviet rule, starting from 1920 until 1991. There was a devastating earthquake in 1988, which again slowed down the development of the city for a while. And then I'll briefly talk about the Cascade Complex and Northern Avenue, which was sort of the part of the city that I focused on doing a bit more research on. So this is just the depiction of from 1827, the Russian troops crossing River Arax, coming into Armenia. It was quite an important point in the history of the country. A lot changed since then. So the Russians had an involvement in the country from quite an early stage, whilst also dealing with sort of oppression, if I can call it that, from the Ottomans and the Persians. So the country went through a lot of years of political oppression, and there were many questions that were raised about its identity and how freely it was able to express that. Alexander Tamanyan, an architect that I mentioned earlier, who grew up in Russia, was of Armenian origin, and he was drawn back to the country to help contribute and develop the city of Yerevan to, as we know it today, with his infamous master plan from the early 1920s. And this is just an image of one of his drawings from his early work, the northern facade drawing for Yaroslavl, an agriculture exhibition, 1930. Here we can see, again, a little bit of Tamanyan's work on the left, the Lukashin master plan. Many of you will be familiar with the image on the right, Ebenezer Howard's Garden City. There were a lot of parallels that could be drawn between the two images here, and his Tamanyan's influence from Ebenezer Howard can be clearly seen in the way the city or the town is arranged. This sort of goes back to the work that he was doing with other pioneers of the Garden City movement in Russia at that time. So on the left here we can see a plan from ranging between 1906 to 1911 of Yerevan, the central part of Yerevan, if you like. And on the right we can see the 1924 proposed master plan by Alexander Tamanyan. These two images are in fact of the same city. There were many points that were used as a reference, and the two master plans were overlain on top of each other. Parts of the city started looking much more like what we see on the right. Other places within the city were changed completely, and from the 1920s onwards, a new identity was created based around the new arrangement. And the image on the right is something that we'll see quite a lot of in the next few slides. That image, the master plan that was drawn, actually started becoming ingrained within the people's memory and the way they understood the city started being very much influenced by this image. This is just an image of the overlay that I talked about earlier. You can see some parts are fairly connected with the previous setup of the city, whereas other parts are distorted, let's just say. And of course, some of the ideas that were used for the development of the master plan were taken from Versailles and other places in France. On the left, we can see Paris, but also further afield, we can see an image of New Delhi in India. Some of the ideas of that time, from the early 20th century to the sort of 1920s, were implemented in the master plan. And it's very interesting here how we can see different parts of the world developing with ideas drip feeding sort of into different places. So here we see a segment of the Tamanyan's master plan, the education sector, and you can see the similarity with the previous images. The same with Republic Square. There's the development of the master plan in 1936 by Tamanyan. He passed away shortly after that, so he was not able to complete the wider development of the city. However, this was one of the only drawings that survived of the development of the city further afield. This was the government building that he proposed and was later built and became a large part of the identity of the city. And we see some of the language of architecture that was generated by Tamanyan being translated into other buildings as well within the city and in the outskirts. So this is the Opera House that he designed. Again, we see the ornamental design and the proportioning that Tamanyan used was something that was taken from medieval art of Armenia and combined with the architectural language of its time. Something that was very unprecedented for the city. When he passed away, people started reinterpreting that with a Soviet influence, if you like, sort of juxtaposing the two different languages together in a rather clumsy way. The city developed, and many attempts were done after he passed away to develop his ideas and to, in many different ways, influenced by a Soviet modernism. I mean, here we see some models of developing Northern Avenue. There was the earthquake that I mentioned, which, So here we see the Cascade complex and its development over the years, which was quite slow. The master plan being ingrained on other buildings and forming an identity as well as the currency. And here we see some development of the Cascade complex. So the description of what's there. An image of it from last year. And a few images of Northern Avenue and their development. Here is the state of the Cascade complex from last year, being left incomplete due to inadequate funds. And the future of the city doesn't quite have a distinct direction, but we can see the development over the past 100 years. And yes, I'll just leave it to that.
Thank you very much, Roy. Thank you for sharing your views on a topic that clearly engaged you right at your centre and obviously engaged you right way through your research and your writing. Paolo, I'm going to start by asking you, what do you think of Roy's work, and particularly your views on the importance of biographical history and defining the link between architecture and its social and its historical context?
Não estava tirando mudo? Estava no mudo, eu acho. Você entendeu a pergunta?
Entendi.
Ah, tá. Então, quer começar a responder? o senhor esteve em Erevan. Então ela falou que é importante o senhor falar que o senhor esteve em Erevan. O
Question
senhor
was a bit
visitou
long.
Erevan.
I'm sorry. O que eu faço questão de destacar
What I
nesse
like
magnífico
to
trabalho
highlight in your magnificent work
é a questão da arquitetura e do urbanismo como um discurso.
is the issue of architecture and urbanism as a discourse,
Discurso histórico.
a historical discourse.
A história de um lugar,
The history of a place,
materialmente falando,
materially speaking,
configurado
configured
como cidade,
as a city.
tem a sua história contada através da evolução e da construção.
It has its history
É um
told
magnífico
through
trabalho.
construction and evolution. Is a magnificent work.
Thank you, Paul.
Sim. A distinta colega lembrou
And she just, my distinctive colleague has reminded me,
que eu não deixe de relatar nessa
and I
reunião
shouldn't forget to say
que eu estive já em Yerevan
that I have been to Yerevan before
nos anos 60, 62.
in 62, in the 60s.
Eu vim de Moscou, que é onde eu estive para o Congresso Mundial da Paz,
And I had been traveling. I went there from Moscow. I went to the Peace Worldwide Conference.
como um brinde
And,
para visitar, e eu que escolhi Yerevan.
I was able to choose a gift, a place to visit, and I chose Yerevan to visit.
Não sei se todos sabem, mas
I don't know if
essa
you're
imagem
aware,
que está aqui à esquerda,
but this image to the
aquela
left,
montanha é o Ararat,
it's the Ararat mountain,
que já está em outro país.
which now belongs to a different country.
Tudo, a cidade, a paisagem, muito emocionante.
And the landscape, everything, it made me very emotive at the time.
Eu cumprimento com muito ênfase ao ilustre colega pelo brilhante trabalho.
And I give you my compliments, my dear colleague, for your brilliant work.
Right. Harriet, I'm coming to you now. Obviously, as the judge of the dissertation medal, you're probably more familiar with Roy's work than any of us. Before you make any specific comments, I'm interested to know, why did the judges consider this to be the winning
Isso não é para
dissertation?
mim. Não é para mim.
I think for us, one of the key things is what we saw to be a highly skilled analysis of a city's transformation. We're particularly interested in the way that you had a very auto-ethnographic approach to your inquiry. I think traditionally we see research as something that's detached from the researcher, but your personal engagement with the subject made this a very compelling story. And that's another point, really, that research should be expressed as a story, not necessarily as a clinical archive of ideas or concepts. The forensic detail of your investigation, not just in visiting it, but how on earth you managed to get access to some of these archives, goodness knows. But it was relentless. And relentlessness is something, again, it was utterly imbued in the work and the way that you turned something that, for some people unfamiliar with this region and having no relationship to it, would not necessarily otherwise be attracted to. I think the importance of being a passionate protagonist about sites like this is so key to architecture. Your ability to understand the importance of a master plan as an architectural motif and in many ways embody whole political concepts, not just historical or philosophical ones. We also felt that you understood something about the importance of historical interpretation and its subjectivity over time, and how you had engaged with the idea of how the same master plan could be read again and again and again, entirely contingent on the external forces in which it was being viewed. So for us, we thought this was a wonderful encouragement to all students to really see themselves as, if you like, this idea of the passionate protagonist, utterly personally engaged in the inquiry and entirely dedicated to the subject.
Thank you. I don't know whether you want to respond to that, Roy. I've no idea how you would.
Thank you.
Not much of a crit, really, is it? Just
Okay, we're going to go into crit bit now. I'm going to ask David. David, what did you think of Roy's presentation? And how well do you think he managed to cover his topic today?
Well, I'll start with a general comment, which is that I think it's very important with these awards that we value the written word, because the written word is essentially about structuring an argument, and architecture, I would contend, is a built thesis. So that's about the overall value, I think, of the dissertation method. I think it's exceptionally important in the context of the architect's work. I think it's incredibly unfashionable, actually, to discuss nationalism as a positive driver. It depends who's presenting the argument. In some hands, it's unacceptable. In others, it's acceptable. And I think you did bring out something that was very interesting, which was that the development of Yerevan was ultimately very eclectic. It isn't really taking a single identity. It's actually it's using a lot of influences to collaborate in producing that identity. And I'll say something contentious here. It's also unfashionable, possibly even unacceptable nowadays to accept the qualities and narratives of Soviet art and architecture. And I do think we need to actually understand that all cultures have equal values. You produced a lovely phrase, the parameters for sculpting a city. This caught my imagination. Writing is a process really for developing and affirming identity, your own identity, and I felt that very strongly in the presentation. And then, of course, the wonderful thing about the written word is you can make it useful to other people. You know, that's really what research should be. It's a personal odyssey which becomes useful to the world at large. Very methodical, very calm analysis. And you communicated it both subjectively and objectively, and I think that's quite an achievement. I've read very subjective, nationalistic readings of cities which suffered from the subjectivity. And finally, just as an end thought, I believe the British government have talked about reinventing the garden city. So it'd be interesting to see how they do this and whether the garden city model will survive into the era of late capitalism. I suspect not.
Thank you, David. I'm just going to throw in a question, since you haven't had one yet, and this is a crit, before we open to the floor. I think we'll do all three, and then we'll ask them all to come to the front, and you can ask them all the questions. What are you hoping will be the effect of your research and this dissertation? What do you hope will happen as a result of doing this?
I suppose there's many layers to this answer, if you like. One being raising awareness of people of the history of this place. It's something that is doesn't quite permeate through to the West, which was one of the things that I've sort of mentioned from the outset, and I think I'm very happy to have received this recognition for. And it has indeed made it to lots of people's ears. But also trying to understand, irrelevant to the context of this city, how we do interpret cities and how we do imagine their futures. It's a question that I think applies to almost every other city that we live in. Each place has its own distinct history, and if we don't take a few steps back to understand how the city has emerged, how can we imagine its future?
That's an extraordinarily good answer. Well done. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the presentation of the project that won the 2016 Bronze Medal for the best design work produced at Part 1. The project is called Formless, an alternative typology for preservation. And it was produced by Alan Chong from Newcastle University. Alan, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
So The first thing I would like to say is thank you for giving me the prize, and thank you, the RIBA, for giving me a chance, maybe the last chance, to present my project, and at the same time to rethink my project and to update my thought in the topic of preservation. So it's a bit scary because I have to present in front of so many professions. So my project is not a practical project, I would say. Instead, this is supposed to be a philosophical way to rethink preservation approach in parallel with the modern expansion and trying to establish a compromise between new and old in the heritage. So obviously in London, many kind of commercial contemporary architecture emerged in the business zone and then spread out around London nowadays. So many buildings were being demolished in order to follow the speed of the development. When we look back to the Renaissance period, and then we can find most of the building in that period was inspired by some cultural aspect as well as some religion aspect. But nowadays, every building, there's a commercial purpose behind the development. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but the lack of contextual elements cause the loss of personality of the city indeed. So recently, Kuhas offered a lecture to present his desire of preservation, and a writer called George, and then he summarized his thought, and then he wrote an article called "Preservation is Overtaking Us," and then at the same time he summarized his lecture into an OMA Preservation Manifesto. He mentioned a word, formless, as a new way for doing preservation. So for preservation, formless, it doesn't mean like absent of form or like nothing. It's about like trying to use an object and then to reframe the existing space. I know it's a bit ambiguous, so I use this term to have more development into my project. When we look back to Sohn's extension, surprisingly, apply the concept of formless works. When we see the section of Sohn Museum, you can see his approach is something like he dismantled the collection and artifacts from ruins, and then he modified it and then relocated it in a new environment. So the new design is to interpret the perception of the artifacts, but not just using a glass box to isolate the collection. And then all the artifacts in the room is the part of the space. So on the left-hand side is like my collage to trying to say, can we use the artifacts to form an extension for the whole building? My inspiration, highly inspired by Rachel. She create a sculpture which is an inverted space, and then when we imagine Sohn Museum as a spatial artifact, this will be more a physical form to play with. So in the middle is all the spaces in Seoul Museum. And so trying to use a virtual concept and then change it to a physical object. And my methodology is about like using this artifact to have an extraction and projection. For example, in the top of the right-hand side, it's like the existing museum, and then I extract the space out and then trying to design the void by using my concept and then relate it to the surrounding. And then the bottom part is to use the extracted space and then project to the other way for the extension. So as you see the diagram, the plan is like to be designed one by one, and then for using the same methodology. So the first move was selected in the entrance of Seoul Museum. As you see the drawing in the bottom, was drawn by Joseph, which was his student, Seoul's student. So as you see in the drawing, the open locker was designed in the middle, which is 14 Lincoln Inn's View. So I was thinking like, what if we trying to switch the entrance from 13 Lincoln's View to 14? Maybe this drawings propose a clue for doing this. So this is my first approach. So for the first step is about the extraction. As you see the space there, I extract it out and then using my methodology to design it as a new entrance for Seoul Museum. And next to it is Seung's cenotaph. So this cenotaph is about like to put his statue inside. So it highly related to my concept, which is to trying to make a fusion with the modern technology and the Asian form or aesthetic elements. The location is quite crucial. As you see, this, the section of Seoul Museum, there's a hierarchy between life and death. So the bottom part, the bottom part is about the death collections. So I place this cenotaph on the second basement to represent. This is the most important thing for the whole museum. This space is not only for Seoul. As you see, the wall, there's so many statues, which is not very eye-catching. But for architect, this to remind, we should be humble for doing architecture, as in space is our main character in our story. There's some models. So for the extension, I extracted some non-key space out and then to place it in next to the museum for doing the extension. In this section, I'm trying to say to make a courtyard connection to break through. To connect all the to connect all the existing courtyard in the Seoul Museum and then extend the courtyard as well. So this section shows the continuity of the courtyard. Also, some elements into the courtyard is like the visual connection. By using some view to reframe the existing collections and some artifacts. Also, I use the same methodology to create the other layer for the courtyard, as you see on the left-hand side. it's about the roof courtyard to allow people to admire the roofscape of Seoul Museum. So what if all the spaces extract out and then project for the extension? The result is the second cycle start. I would say a restart, or maybe. By using the same methodology and then extract the non-key space out, and then by using the same footprint for doing the extension. Also, I do some Gothic connection within the Seoul Museum, but I'm not going to say this for too much. So the extension in 2075, as you can see the plan, the spaces are quite related to the original museum, as in the extension is using the original footprint, and so the language is about the same. In a bit different, in the second cycle is about the program. As you see, Song's extension, he modified his own house from the residential purpose to the collection purpose. That means the museum nowadays. So I would like to do the same approach. It's like imagine the desire of preservation in the future is really insurmountable. So I designed kind of a workshop for the desire of the preservation purpose. So this is the experimental quarter for the future. As you see, there's a studio and there's a testing chamber inside.
We've got 2 more minutes.
And also the other side is architecture workspace, kind of using new technology to emerge with the existing museum. This is the section to show the continuity of the whole project. And as you may see, the museum is getting expanded, and then the language is about the same. So this is the final image for the roofscape, and I think I will leave it here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your beautifully detailed drawings, and for examining and redefining the notions of architectural conservation and cultural heritage. Paolo, would you like to comment on this project?
É muito difícil comentar o seu trabalho.
It's very difficult to comment
Comentar o seu trabalho.
on your work
Porque é discurso muito forte.
because it's a very strong discourse.
Eu quero cumprimentar porque é belíssimo.
And I would like to give you my compliments because it's extremely beautiful.
E se for permitido dizer, eu diria é impossível
And if I'm allowed to say, I would say it's almost impossible
to understand se não for construído.
If one doesn't build it, it's really hard to really understand it.
Deve ser construído porque possamos apreciar.
It must be built so we can appreciate it.
Sounds
That's
like
my idea.
you have a commission by the sound of it. Thank you, Paolo. David, one thing that makes the President's Medals quite unique and actually such a wonderful awards programme is the way in which it celebrates innovation and also proposes new ideas for the future of our profession. This is a project that, in a way, does all of that, while providing a really fresh approach to conservation as an evolving process. What were your thoughts? What were the thoughts of the judging panel when they saw Alan's project?
Well, I think we were awestruck. I mean, it's an extraordinary project, but I think Lutyens described the architectural drawing as a love letter to a contractor. Now, of course, actually the drawing is so much more than that. The drawing is actually a means to emote, to inform, and to suggest ways forward. What you do in the project is you use history to actually define an audacious kind of modernity, and I think that's extremely exciting. The Soane Museum, of course, is much more than the sum of its parts. It's become a way of thinking about memory and the way that we archive our own personal histories. Soane really left us with this piece that informed us about his personal psychology. Few architects do that. I've said before, it's provocative, it's an exquisite project, but your presentation, I think, did something else. It elegantly situated the idea in an urban history, and I think that's extremely important. I think too, that there is a problem that faces all citizens in historic cities, and that's knowing when to take that history and to put it in a skip. This is a big problem for us. So I will say that this project is also, I think, much more than the sum of its parts in the way that the Soane Museum is that too. It's actually about if and when we choose to be truly modern. And your timeline, taking it to 2075, I think is really interesting. I've got I guess, a critical perspective on it. The late writer and critic, Peter Blundell-Jones, I remember many years ago, he was looking at a student project which had just been given a very good class of degree. And he said, well, it's so crepuscular. And I've no idea how that translates into Portuguese. But there is an issue for me about the presence or absence of light. I think there's a dialogue between the dark and dusky spaces that you create as an analogue of the existing Soane Museum and something to do with the presence of light. And I think it's something that as an architectural designer you may have navigated around. But notwithstanding that, fabulous project. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you want to answer him. You're very welcome not to. Harriet, what did you think of this wonderful project?
Oh, Soane, yes, the master of the segmental arch and the indirect roof light. Just to pick up on David's point, I felt that what was kind of under-leveraged in your project was this idea of light being an architectural material and an architectural form in itself. But that was absolutely at the heart of what made this exquisite as a design project. As someone who's obviously qualified in conservation, the preservation debate is actually often dominated by stymied, marauding, nostalgia-riddled NIMBYs who probably voted to leave Europe. So I often find this whole idea of heritage, and it's coming back to the earlier presentation, its nationalistic roots, incredibly problematic, and in fact more so. So I think what you've done here is use the process of typological generation, and that's another question I have for you, because I think the typology thing is ambiguous in some ways, but you've attempted to use the process of typological generation as a means to try and solve this problem using quite a lot of wit. Even though you've got the best poker face right now, I actually think this is a very entertaining, but in a very intelligent way. I also think that good design projects don't necessarily propose fixed outcomes. They proposed fluid possibilities. And what you've done is prototype a methodology for the creation of a formal space that is negotiable, could be transient, and could be endlessly renegotiated as a method of production, of spatial production. And I think really what you've done is force the question, can we really pioneer a typology? If you look critically at many of the forms within your designs, they have their roots, they have their associations with other genres and previous typologies. But what you've done is obviously reconfigure them in ways that are imaginative and original and provocative and playful. So I think that was really striking about your process. And finally, what you've also done is identify that the void or the absence is as much architecture as the presence of architecture, and in some ways disrupted a lot of Derrida's and Eisenman's preoccupations when they were locked indoors, smoking, which you could do back in the 1980s, and torturing students in tutorials with the theorization of architecture. So I think that this is profoundly clever and in many ways, to me, very much a written thesis in its process. I mean, you could describe this and it would be very much a thesis, not just a design project. Yes. And having that duality is, for me, what really distinguishes the work as truly exceptional.
Thank you. Thank you, Harriet. Any last comments in response? That's perfectly fine. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Well done. Thank you very much. Well, we need to move now on to our third and final presenter and allow time for some questions from the floor at the end of this. The 2016 President's Silver Medal for Best Design Work produced at Part 2 went to Thomas Chi from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And I'd like him to now to present his project, Crafts Vault, the V&A Academy of Artisanal Crafts.
Good afternoon. I'm Thomas Chi, and my project is called Craft Vault, the V&A Academy of Artisanal Crafts. The project tries to promote a new typology of craft museums for today's in response to the uncertain future of the global financial crisis. After the global financial crisis, the uncertain future of craft industry in UK. And once in a while, changes happen, and 250 years ago, a change was so great and so significant to our life, and which affects all our life today, which the historians have used another vocabulary to describe change, a revolution, or more precisely, the industrial revolutions. And as you can see from this painting by Thomas Gamebrough, in the 18th century, he depicts what the life was like at the time when people were living in rural villages and enjoying the life with leisure and create their own things for themselves with their hands. And in the early 19th century, many inventors starting to build different types of machines. And at that time, people starting to realize that they can use these new machines to produce themselves with large amount of goods and large amounts of different things, which can never be produced before within such a short period of time. During the first industrial revolution, the invention of steam engine also allows a rapid urbanization of cities, and also because of the rise of workforce inside the city, especially in London, and many people can come together and to create a lot of wealth and new products inside the cities. And so at that time, in the Victoria period, is the time of wealth and power. But at the same time, the uncontrolled reliance of new technologies also brings some big problems, such as pollutions, child labor, and also, for example, like the great discrepancy between the rich and the poor. And so at that time, some thinkers or architects and artists starting to try to promote or to persuade people in different ways to look back into what they were doing in the past many centuries. And that at that time when people still was appreciate their own hand making and also the nature and get inspired by nature, and which later this all these peoples also inspired the later arts and craft movement, which is also very significant until the 1930s, and also the self-help culture around the world till now, which also encourage peoples to think and to invent and to experiment. When we look back to the craft industry in UK now, and what we are seeing is that after the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9, the entire economy is undergoing the greatest downturn for the past 60 years, and the demand for craft products in UK has greatly reduced, and also because for the nature of craftsmen here, because mainly they are so specific in their skills for different types of craft and different materials with a very long training period. Let's say for generally for apprentice it takes 7 years, and then later 5 to 7 years longer period of practical experience as a journeyman, and then until which they really produce a masterpiece when others craftsmen is recognized them as a next generation of craftsmen, and so. And thirdly, because of some new emergence of new technologies now, such as the 3D printing and artificial intelligence as in computers, when all those machines start to learn themselves and to evolve themselves, which actually I just speculate in the future, maybe it will be so difficult for ordinary people to distinguish between the machine-produced products with the craftsman's handcraft works, because they are actually a complete duplicate products actually. So all these factors have come together and really threaten the living prospects for the craftsmen in UK. And so at that time, I have the thinking about, like in the future, maybe that all the peoples will are so loved and to live in the virtual reality, when everything is so well made in the virtual world, with only one craftsman left in the world, just patiently making his own work and mourning the human surrendered machines. And also, I also start to think about what people in the future will try to preserve the craft skills, the lost craft skill in the very recent history. And for this drawing, the archive, I was thinking about in the future when peoples all around the world gather together and to try to start recording the process of making of different craft skills into small capsules, and then store them in the underground archive eternally. When in the future, next generations, people can still from time to time come back and to look at how people produce their work, and only leaving the very small piece above the ground as a monument that denotes the time when machines and starting to totally replace all human-made things. And the expo, this drawing, I tried to get inspired by the Great Exhibition in 1851 in Hyde Park, London. That instead of like in the exhibition when the final products of different craftworks were exhibited, in this one, the craftsmen from around the world come together to perform their own craft, to make works there inside, and the peoples come and to look at how different craftworks were created. And the third one is the workshops. For this one, I was thinking when people, ordinary people, take the initiative themselves and to start to teach the next generation about the skills and the knowledge that inherited from their ancestors in their own home, and to try to modify their internal space to suit with their specific craftworks when the people from outside don't know what's happening inside. And so these three drawings laid the main ideas for my projects, for my design, which the archive, the workshop, and also the expo, which I want them to be kept at the spirit of my design project. And so for this design project, I look at the Victorian Albert Museum, which has a very long history of storing craft and arts and design works. I try to thinking about making an extension to the museum itself, but rather than like the Victorian Albert Museum, which kind of storing the craftworks and machines and so on, which is directly linked to the 1851 Great Exhibition. And in my design, I try to allows people to look at the process of making and the way the craftsman works. And also for this site considerations, I instead of directly built an extension building nearby the V&A, I find another site which is a bit further north in of the Baroque, which is on the in the North Kensington, which is relatively poor place, but and also relatively isolated. But at the same time, I find the beauty of the sites, which from here you can see on one side is the railway track. On the site itself was a brownfield site left by a local gaswork, and there is a canal, and next to it is a cemetery. And this site has long been waste as a brownfield site, but not developed. And the neighborhood is very calm and silent. And so I think this site is very beautiful, and I want to utilize it for my projects. And for my buildings, and so and here's my design, which I try to bring it as a monumental buildings that's situated there, and at the same time is remain very silent and calm onto the site, and responding to the depth, the surroundings, which with the cemetery, the already unused brownfield sites here, and here's some of my models, and I also take the cruise of the craft and arts of the wards, and tries to produce different ways of thinking about a new type of structural system from my buildings itself that enable me to create different kind of spatial experience and lighting condition inside that fits with my projects. And here's my my building itself. And here's some procedures of my models, and so the building itself is 3-floor buildings with the basement part as the back of house and material storing, and at the same time one major part is the archive that I have talked about before, which store all the sketches and drawings and materials and so on from the craftsmen. And the first floor is when people arrive, walking through the entrance piazza, and they go inside the buildings. One part is the exhibition space, and the other part, small pockets are the workshops for craftsmen. And for the upper part is the observation deck, which I will going to show you. And here is the sections of the buildings, and you can see how people walk into it and look, and the craftsmen work inside. And here is the exhibition space that I was talking about. When people walking around, they can see what the craftsmen were working there. And actually, for this project, as you can see, I utilized the gasometer, one of it as a dormitory for the craftsmen. And at the same time, inside is a market for the craftsmen to interact with the people. So when the visitors come and want to talk with the craftsmen, they can do so inside. And here is the underground archive, and is how it looks from outside. And the river, and here is inside the gasometer. And so basically, there's my project. But I just want to add a few words for it. Is that for the project, I'm actually not going to make answer or solutions to solve every problems for that. For the now, when we can see during this consumerist society on steroid, when everything was gotten so easily and new technologies come and everyone embrace them. And I'm not going to stop the trend, but actually I want to make a statement here that I want this project as like a new typology or a motive for people to really think about and to about what we have lost in the very recent past, that all the craft skills were actually the basics for what we are having now, what we are enjoying now, and that's and basically that's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Goodness me, this is such an ambitious proposal, isn't it? I can see that the museum typology is incredibly complex. Of course, you don't have to consider just issues of capacity, storage, display, but obviously expectations of a client. We will have those visitors, employees, and not to mention critics. Paolo, having worked on projects such as the National Museum of Sculpture and the Pinacoteca in Brazil, or more recently, the National Coach Museum in Portugal, can you give Thomas some advice?
Diante de trabalhos tão brilhantes,
in face of such brilliant work,
eu me sinto muito constrangido para dar conselhos.
I feel even embarrassed to give you any advice.
Quem sabe você poderia me dar algum conselho?
Maybe you could give me some advice.
De qualquer modo, a transformação da cidade que esse projeto pressupõe é muito estimulante.
The transformation of the city that this project presents is very stimulating.
E faz ver também que o grande museu sempre, para nós, será a própria cidade. Ela conta a história de uma maneira muito forte e interessante.
And the greatest museum for us will always be the city itself, which presents a great deal of history.
Há um aspecto muito peculiar nesse projeto que me chamou a atenção, é que você está exibindo indivíduos, pessoas humanas.
A particular point of this project is that you are exposing people, human beings.
Os artesãos que deviam estar lá dentro para os outros verem.
The craftsmen should be there for other people to see.
É muito interessante a especulação, mas eu queria dizer que, quanto a isso, o grande museu para você ver gente é a própria cidade.
And it might be a bit of speculation, but the biggest museum for you to see people is the city itself.
eu posso dizer que você deve continuar a sua pesquisa, vai ser muito útil para todos nós,
I
e
think-
dia, quem sabe, alguma coisa possa ser construída.
I think you should continue your designs, your projects. It can be very useful, and maybe this will be built one day.
My congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Harriet, what did you think of this project? And particularly, how do you think it proposed to make the interior spaces of the museum more visible?
Yes, well, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm actually based at the Design Museum at the moment, and it's this endless kind of concern. How do you really engage people in museum spaces? Because possibly a dystopian way of viewing this is to see it as positioned between two current cultural obsessions, the selfie and X Factor. Because what you have are people who want to be seen to be engaged in the artefacts, not to merely observe, but through a sense of collective narcissism, position themselves quite actively within the environment of a museum. But at the same time, they're not necessarily instinctively talented or necessarily craftspeople by definition, but they want to feel like they are. So this experiential design thing is having a huge influence over how we reimagine the future of archives and museums. So I think you've really engaged with this in an interesting way. Perhaps a more utopian reading of this project comes back to the age-old problem of how do we promote the value of craft. In this country at the moment, it's a very political question. We have an overemphasis, I would say, on STEM rather than STEAM subjects. We've had craft courses across London and more recently in the CAS shut down and not being replaced. And at the risk of being very political, what you have is, you know, the craft economy in the UK contributing 3.4 billion every year, but there's nowhere for these craft courses to be situated. So it's quite possible this is not just a utopian vision, but you know, a tipping point reality now for many people wanting to pursue craft education. And just coming back to some of Senet's comments from the books, like you, I'm a bit of a Senet fan actually. I'm going to just quote him directly and try to do it reasonably slowly, but he said, to the absolutist in every craftsman, each imperfection is a failure. To the practitioner, obsession with perfection seems a perception for failure. And I thought this is really something, if I could, in a way, create the epitaph for your project, that might well be it. But it cracks open the buildability problem for me. And the idea that when I looked at the drawings initially in the ceremony, I thought it was incredibly provocative of you to not include structural detailing, knowing full well that within the forms you're proposing is a query about structurally whether they would actually work. And I thought that was quite a deliberate provocation to us as architects, to the community of architecture, to suggest that actually building with inherent fragility makes quite a profound political point about these kinds of institutions. Because I think you've designed an arc, really, an arc for craft, a safe space that, quite frankly, couldn't be more timely in the current situation. And just to finish on one of my other favourite quotes as a fellow lush, Richard Sennett once said, "You can't understand how wine is made by simply drinking lots of it." I have tried this at home. But it makes an important point about how making things, solving any problem, not just generating craft artefacts, but making things in a three-dimensional way, testing concepts through form making, is completely polymathematic. It transcends every field, not just architecture or craft or the arts, but in every area. It helps you solve business problems, it helps you solve all kinds of conceptual, financial and spatial problems. And it's vital to innovation and invention. So I think these spaces, this notion of craft as being something that necessarily has craft outcomes is a naive one, and what you've done is push us closer to this conversation that needs to happen about the craft process being the opportunity for all kinds of things to be reimagined and redesigned. So I thought that was very clever and timely. Thank you.
Very good. Well, David, obviously architecture is normally site-related, site-specific. But architectural education obviously is by nature, it's international in its ambition and its scope. It seems in Thomas's project, all three medalists who are, in my view, incredible examples of students who, regardless of where they live or study, are all able to create really, truly inspiring work. And that's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. What does that say about current architectural education to you?
Well, big question, but what does it say about current architectural education, or past architectural education, or hopefully future architectural education? The answer to that is that the emphasis on the generation of ideas in schools of architecture is very much underrated from those outside the schools of architecture. These are actually the powerhouse of the future of the profession and the future of architecture. Well, there is a need, of course, always in academia for the courses that are delivered by our communities of academics and students to have intense professional relevance. But we also need to know and acknowledge that the radical rereading of architecture can only be achieved by that freedom being respected and allowed to flourish. I think that's extremely important. It's not up to us or any other professional body in the world to regulate or to trammel the creative work of the academy. Finally, I guess I have a really interesting observation. Well, I don't think it's actually interesting, my observation, but I'll make a comment. I particularly enjoy your suggestion that artisans might transform the museum, because museums are crusty and fusty and musty, and you know it's a model that's disappearing rapidly. You know, I think about your proposition. I think, well, perhaps we remodel the RIBA around that kind of model. But I do have a view that there is something about putting the artisan on display that worries me a little bit. It's rather like putting the peacock in the cage or the penguins in a penguin pool, even if it's designed by Lubetkin. I worry about the artisan because I think once they're subject to that public gaze, I think in a way it removes some of the dignity of craft that you're actually trying to reinvest in the museum.
Thank you. Typically profound. Thank you very much, everybody. And I wonder whether, whether you'd like to come and join us. And our three, Roy, Alan, and Thomas, are now going to be very, very brave and subject themselves to comments or questions from the floor. We don't have a lot of time, but I'd be very happy to have a couple of questions from them. You can say no if you don't want to answer. It's perfectly fine. I'll stand up and I can see if there's anybody that would like to ask a question. Well, this is going to be quick, isn't it? Thank you very much.
Can I back to ask Alan how he designed his sewn Ian type things which weren't sewn but looked like sewn? How did you manage it? Did you hear it?
Would you if anybody doesn't know, would you like to tell them who you are?
Hello, I'm Andrew Crompton from Liverpool University.
Okay. Because I dream so.
You dreamt them up?
Yeah, no. Just because the whole methodology is about, as I said, it's about the extraction and projection. In my design, extraction, it means like extracting Sohn's design out, and then I project the extracted space to the new extension. So at the end of the extension, all the spaces will be kind of quite similar with the original design, but by using my concept to relate it to the surroundings and then to relate it to the context, I think maybe this is the answer of like why so similar or like so engaged with the original design.
Thank you. I'm not sure that you got an answer. We've got one at the back and then I've got another one at the front. I think that might have to do for today.
Hi. This is a question to Thomas. First of all, congratulations. I really enjoyed listening about your project. So, two short questions. One of them is, in your process of form finding, would you say that you were dependent on having an access to digital tools? And do you think it would compromise? Does that classify as craft? And does that matter to you or not in this project? And the other question is, would you agree that museums are buildings for displaying things that are no more? Or would you challenge that? Thank you.
That's two questions for the price of one. See if you can
Thank
get
you.
an answer.
Thank you for the question. Firstly, about my view on the computers and the digital way of making of my projects in the process. To me, I think computer itself is also can be considered as a craft products, because for my own kind of thinking, I think what defines craft and what defines just machine production things is like the history or the process of making it, and to continuously refining and continuously to have the passions to experience and not to worry about failure. And so even for computers, we actually, during the process, we need to try a lot of time to produce and then we may throw them away and to pick it up again and to continue our journey of explorations. And so I think to define the craftsman really is that we should continue to have that spirit underneath that is which distinguishes us from machines. And yeah, and for second questions is for my answers to that is actually the design itself is quite different from artist museum, because inside the exhibits actually from time to time renewed by the craftsmen who produce the works inside. So there are some temporary exhibitions inside, but at the same time the works that exhibits inside are created by the craftsmen from time to time, and they may replace it, or people may also sell them. But at the same time, people when looking at the craftsmen inside need a lot of time to refine their own works, and they talk with the craftsmen themselves, and maybe in very close future they may join the craftsmen themselves and to learn how to work inside the museum as well. And so for that I think this I would like this project as like a new kind of museum buildings that to make a difference from the others museum. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a fulsome answer. I'm quite sad to say that we've actually run out of time for this afternoon. But I wonder whether you would just join with me to give enormous thanks to not just to the ambition of the projects and the skill which we've seen in what I can only consider to be a fantastic future for architecture, but for these three very brave young men coming and standing in front of you lot to have a crit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a very quick completion. I'd like to say thank you very much to Paolo, to Harriet, and to David for joining me on the panel. And please come and have a look on the second floor at the President's Medals exhibition, which is set out in the practice space. Maybe if our three very brave young men would be kind enough to stand around, would come downstairs to the second floor and perhaps see if there's anybody else that would like to talk to you one-to-one with questions. Thank you so much for coming today. And just a final round, thank you very much to our panelists and to our presenters today.